What is up? Good evening and welcome to the DFS Academy, Club Fantasy's weekly DFS show. And you know, we're 1 week in. You've already lost Puka Nacua. Christian McCaffrey's already missing time. We just can't have nice things is what it really comes down to. But that is why we love DFS. It's a new lineup every week. Let's build some good ones. You know, Austin, every time I do my intro, I'm pretty sure I say good evening because we record this show on Thursday night. The best chance is people are probably listening to it Friday. But when I think about it, we're relevant for 48 hours, maybe 51-ish hours from when this thing goes. So there's at least 2 evenings that someone might be listening to this. So I guess it's still relevant. Welcome to DFS Academy. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, how you doing, my friend?
Doing good. On to week 2. I told Josh on the Thursday show, we're getting a little bit better sense of normalcy around DFS. Honestly, week 2 feels so much more comfortable for me than week 1 because I love playing cash. Week 1, a little bit of a crapshoot. Week 2, though, I now know every single player I want confidently, like out the gate.
Yeah, I don't think I cashed. So I typically only play my cash over on FanDuel. And so I jumped into some 50-50s and some head-to-heads, but I made some bad decisions, and I don't think I cashed in any lineup at any point this week. I think I cashed in our showdown last Thursday, and that was my only DFS cash. And then I forgot to play all the other showdowns because I just have way too much going on this season. So that's just how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, you know, it happens. It happens.
Yeah. How do you feel about the Christian McCaffrey thing? I know a lot of people are pretty up in arms, especially after Jordan Mason said he knew he was starting on Friday. Kind of a dirty move to kind of leave everybody out in the cold on Monday. Were you affected at all? I had 2 lineups I had to take zeros because I didn't want to cut anybody to go grab some randos. So.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, I got away kind of scot-free just because I wasn't able to get Christian McCaffrey in any of my redraft leagues. So the only place I had him was best ball, and somebody else magically became my running back instead. So
I had 3 drafts in 1 week where I had the first pick. Essentially, one's a keeper league, so I knew I was keeping McCaffrey. And in one of them, I was like, just don't take McCaffrey this time. Take Tyreek Hill. I had Tyreek Hill all queued up. Took McCaffrey, so it just was a bad week altogether. You know who it wasn't a bad week for, Austin? That is the winner of last week's Milli Maker. We call this section Answers to the Test. We didn't have this last week, obviously, because there was no lineup. We like to tell you guys the lineup that was built, the points they scored, and how many Austin got right, which was 2 this week, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot. So 196.88 points from Josh Allen, Devon Achane, Joe Mixon, Josh Reynolds, Tyreek Hill, Alec Pierce, big Austin play there. We're going to talk about that in a second. Jawan Johnson, Rashid Shaheed, two Saints players, and then the Vikings defense who scored that touchdown. So Austin, let's start with your top of the class last week was Josh Allen. And I gave you crap about Alec Pierce, and he pops up in the Milli Maker lineup, catching just 2 enormous bombs of touchdowns.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I mean, I think one of my takeaways from this lineup, and we talk about this frequently, but it's worth reiterating, is even in the Milli Maker, you don't have to get different at every single position, right?
Such a good point.
Josh Allen was like 10% rostered. Tyreek Hill was like 30% rostered in the Milli Maker. They just were good plays. So we talk sometimes too much about getting contrarian in tournament lineups, but you don't have to just be different everywhere. But you do have to be different somewhere, and that's where Alec Pierce. I loved that he was in the Milli Making lineup. I wish I had him in my Milli Maker, but I had him elsewhere. It was fun to have him as a bring back to the Houston side. So we're going to keep it rolling this week. Try and find our next player that makes it in the Milli Maker.
Well, I have a dynasty team on its last legs. I'm not good at rebuilds, and this team is just whatever the worst case of a dumpster fire is. and Pierce is sitting on my bench. And I'm like, man, I wish I had just played him just for the brags of being like, yeah, 125, baby. Like, because what a week he had. So yeah, great call out there. But I love what you said. And guys, remember what he said, because it was actually, Austin, believe it or not, something I wanted to ask you about when we got to my tourney picks at the end of the show was, are they too chalky for a couple of these picks? And it sounds like those might be able to work in the right scenarios. Guys, before we get into the cash plays of the week, let's talk about a couple of things here. First and foremost, are you subscribed to Club Fantasy's YouTube channel yet? Last I heard, we definitely have 10 shows. We are on our way to 12 shows every single week. And it's different faces. You don't just have to tune in to see me and hear Austin. Like literally, there's going to be people that you've never even heard of in the fantasy industry. They're going to provide you some of the greatest information that you get here, because everybody at Club Fantasy busts their asses to make sure we're doing great work for you. Hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. But you know what? When you watch these videos, it helps us get a little bit of money so we can pay these people for all the hard work they're doing. Secondly, speaking, if you want to win a little bit of money, you can actually play DFS against Austin, myself, and a bunch of great crews from the Club Fantasy group. We have $2 contests that run on FanDuel and DraftKings. Links are in the description of this video, and they will also be in Austin's article that is going to drop tomorrow. So if you want to play some DFS with us, show us you're better than us, go ahead and jump into the contest. We will announce the winners every single week. We have a couple of winners to announce, guys who won last year, a couple of winners to announce at the end of the show. Austin, let's get into those cash plays. These are your specialty. This is what your article is about, but you always like to give a few different plays for the show versus the article. We're going to start with what we call the top of the class. These are the high price players. These are the guys where you're spending up. And Austin, you start off with a guy who had a pretty good week after a lot of questions surrounding him in the offseason.
Yeah, my dude got paid in the offseason. So my favorite player, if I'm picking someone over the 8,000 range, is CeeDee Lamb. He is $8,800 on DraftKings. He's the most expensive player on the slate. He is $9,800 on FanDuel. I'm going to say a bunch of things about CeeDee Lamb that are great, but I'm going to throw out there immediately, I'm actually probably not spending this much on a player this week. There are a lot of really good punt plays and mid-tier players. But if I am, this is the guy I'm picking because he got 10 targets last week, which is huge. Volume is king in fantasy football and in DFS. Also, let's just process of elimination, the guy's over 8K. Christian McCaffrey, he may not play. We don't know yet. That's TBD. If he does play, I still may not play him.
Who's paying whatever? I didn't even pay attention to his pricing because I didn't rank him this week, but who's going to pay that for somebody who missed last week and burned everybody on Monday night, you know?
Yes. Could be a great tournament play if he does play for that very reason. Justin Jefferson plays the San Francisco 49ers. It's not a great matchup for him. And Amon-Ra St.Brown just laid an egg against one of the fourth best matchup for wide receivers since week 16 of last year. So I want to see some more security for him. We're going to talk about him later for a different segment. So process of elimination, if I'm looking at the guys over 8K, it's CeeDee Lamb. I think it's just a really good matchup for him. He's going to get the targets. Brandon Cooks was in and out of the lineup last week. That's even more reason for CeeDee Lamb to get more targets. Jake Ferguson is likely to be limited because of his knee injury. More targets for CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, all roads run to more targets for CeeDee Lamb is what it really comes down to. I found it interesting when I read your comment that you're not paying up for anybody this week. I started thinking about last year and how my eyes would pop out of my head with the Christian McCaffrey salaries. And I feel like last year McCaffrey was interesting at running back because he's just so much better than everyone else who plays running back in fantasy football. We don't really have that at wide receiver. There's typically 5 guys who are in a group together. Obviously, it's Chase, Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and then a lot will throw Amon-Ra St.Brown in there. And you already mentioned, like, some of those didn't have great weeks. Tyreek Hill's obviously not on the main slate. But what the fact of the matter is, Austin, when I look at those 5 guys, I immediately just turn the salaries on their head, and that's how I rank them. Whoever the cheapest of those 5 guys is, that's the one I want because I feel like the production is going to be the same if they all pop. Like, obviously, you could have Amon-Ra St.Brown do absolutely nothing, but you're running that risk feasibly with everybody. But that's the first thing I do in my rankings is if I'm going to leave elite wide receivers, I just flip the cash over because I'm not going to pay up for the high guy. Whereas in this case, you're kind of right. The safest one happens to be the most expensive one.
Yeah, and I think your strategy you just laid out is particularly good for tournaments because it allows you to get creative elsewhere. In cash, I think paying up for the most expensive guy is actually not an awful strategy, depending on the matchup, because oftentimes Tyreek Hill will be the most expensive receiver on the slate, and he's pretty consistently getting 20, 30 fantasy points on DraftKings. So like it works out a lot of the time. You can't always build your roster that way, depending on the context of the rest of the slate. Like if there's not a good quarterback elsewhere, you may need to pay up for Josh Allen. So, but I think for tournaments, that's a really great way to think about it, of look at where the value is and get a little bit different that way.
If you guys haven't picked up on it yet, Austin loves cash games. I am a much bigger tournament guy. I'm a guy who loves to play the lottery ticket every single week. So you're going to get, when my point of view kicks in, it's going to be a lot of, it works way better in tournaments than in cash when you need to be safe. And so that's just the way it shakes out sometimes. Moving on from the top of the class, we're going to go to the band nerds. These are the $6,000 to $8,000 players. We say they're the good students, but spend a little bit too much time practicing to be the top of the class. So the kind of mid-tier guys, Austin, 6,000 to 8,000. I think personally, you probably have the most popular player. If he's not the most rostered player, I don't know what I'll do, but it'll be incredible. Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, there are several players this week that I think are going to be highly rostered. Cooper Kupp is among them. He is $7,600 on DraftKings. Funny enough, he is $7,700 on FanDuel, which is cheaper than Puka Nacua is on FanDuel. Even though Puka Nacua just went on IR, FanDuel kind of junked that one up. But yeah, I don't think he had been put on the IR yet when the slate was released.
I think he actually just went on IR today, if I remember correctly. They have been delaying the process for a bit. So,
but Cooper Kupp had 14 catches on 21 targets in week 1. Now, I don't think he'll get 21 targets again, but
because he's gonna get 30.
But Puka Nacua is out, and so it's gonna fall to Cooper Kupp. It's gonna fall to another receiver that we'll talk about in a minute. Arizona's a frisky team, but the volume is still just gonna be there for Cooper Kupp. I have no concerns. It's gonna be a volume play. He gets 10 catches, 100 yards. That's all you need.
I think it's interesting you described Arizona as frisky, because right now Arizona's points against stats are going to look a little deflated. Yes. Because Buffalo ran this bizarro offense last week where they only passed the ball twice in the entire first half of that game. And that's just so strange to me against the team that doesn't have this great secondary. So Buffalo did them a favor. And then when you think what I just said, they only passed the ball twice, but then Josh Allen still came out of that game with, I think, 200 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah. So literally the second half, Josh Allen ate when they decided to stop just running the football, to where I think Arizona is a team that could get beat up on if a team just wants to pass the football.
Yeah, I could see that as well. I do think, but what I think is important for this game script going the way you want it to is that Arizona's offense is also frisky, that like they're going to stay competitive in the game, even if the defense can be beat up on. Their offense is going to, I think, continue to score points, which will push the Rams to have to continue to pass the ball.
And you have 2 players in here, something that you drew my attention to years ago when we started this show. When players are closely priced between FanDuel and DraftKings, it means one of 2 things. They are either overpriced on DraftKings or underpriced on FanDuel, because FanDuel has the higher salary. With Kupp only being $100 more on FanDuel, is this a case with the Puka Nacua injury thing where you brought up that he's cheaper than Nacua? This is a case where FanDuel is underpricing Cooper Kupp this week, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think he should be in the 8K range on FanDuel. They weren't ready for Nacua to be out, and I guess they were thinking that Nacua was going to continue to compete for targets, even though Cooper Kupp was getting a ton of targets before Nacua went out. But whatever, FanDuel, their pricing, the way they handle their pricing is different than DraftKings. We'll talk about this throughout the year. FanDuel is weirdly sometimes way more reactive than DraftKings is to single game data points, which is also weird to me because I would have expected them to have reacted more strongly than Cooper Kupp. That's why I'm so surprised about this. But hey, works out for us. I think Cooper Kupp will be incredibly highly rostered, particularly on FanDuel for that reason.
Like I said, I play most of my cash on FanDuel, so I'm not mad to see this. And then you have a quarterback for your next pick. who I'd been giving a hard time this entire offseason, I am already backing off because when my guy is healthy, he is playing the most insane game of Madden in fantasy football right now.
Yeah, so Anthony Richardson, he's $6,800 on DraftKings. Back to what I just said about DraftKings being less reactive. He only went up just a little bit in salary, but on FanDuel, he's all the way up to 8,500. They reacted way more strongly to his performance last week. Green Bay did not look great on defense last week. They did a good job containing Jalen Hurts to the pocket and preventing him from getting outside on scrambles. But it also almost seemed like Jalen Hurts was trying to work more from the pocket than what we've seen in years past. So I could see Anthony Richardson taking off more and being able to beat up on this defense. He just has the rushing upside. He's cheap enough on DraftKings. I do prefer this pick on DraftKings a little bit more than I do on FanDuel because he's more expensive on FanDuel. But essentially, I'm going basically with what you said, Ryan. As long as he's healthy, I think I'm going to play him until he gets too expensive because the floor is there. Like he crushed it. He was the most highly rostered player last week. I feel like that could continue this week against Green Bay. And so the other thing there is like, if he's going to be rostered by half of the field and he fails, so what? Like half the field also failed on their quarterback spot, and I'll have players elsewhere that'll help me hit the cash line.
What an interesting point. Again, been doing this show with you for 3 years, in total for 4 years, and I've never heard someone bring that up. That if you know one of these risky players, Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, the rushing quarterbacks who could get hurt, if you know they're high rostered, you kind of don't have to worry about it as much in cash, because if you're in a head-to-head, there's probably a 75% chance your opponent has them. And if you're in a 50-50, there's a good chance that half the field is starting this person. So it doesn't matter if they fail because you all have the same kind of bad move.
Yeah. And the other thing about it is Indy plays in the 1 o'clock slate of games. So if he does fail and you happen to be in that position where you are below the cash line heading into the 4 o'clock late games, you have time to pivot and late swap your lineup to get off of somebody that might be a chalky player like Cooper Kupp in the 4 o'clock games and get onto someone who might be a little bit more tournament oriented, that has higher upside, but is different than the rest of the field to give you a chance to cash.
Austin, we've been doing this show for a while now. I know that's come up way too many times this early in the show. That might be the first time a late swap has been mentioned. Do you want to quickly explain that for folks who might be new to DFS?
Yeah, for sure. So on, at least I know on DraftKings and FanDuel, you set your lineup in time for the 1 o'clock games, but your roster only locks for the players whose games starts, and it only does it when the game is scheduled. So if the game is like 10 minutes delayed, then it will be locked because the game was scheduled to start at 1. But what that means is that the players in your lineup who start at the 4 o'clock window, they won't lock until those games start, which means when you are setting your lineup, if you have particularly most of the time you're starting a receiver in your flex spot, always make sure if you have a receiver starting at the 4 o'clock window, that player is in the flex spot, because that gives you more flexibility to change that flex spot later. On FanDuel, they have started including Sunday Night Football in the main slate, which is kind of throwing me off a little bit on how I'm setting my lineups. But that late swap concept will then continue on to the Sunday Night Football matchup.
And it's another great Sunday night game this week with Houston, Chicago. There's a lot of players in there that could could matter for this and certainly matter in the late swap. And then for your next wide receiver, your final one on this tier, it's another situation where $200 difference between the two websites.
Yeah, so Rashee Rice is 4,700 on DraftKings. He's 67. Wow, where did I get 47?
I was hoping you were right about 47. I was going to go get him into every lineup.
No, he is $6,700 on DraftKings, $6,900 on FanDuel. I want to shout out Matthew Betts on this one because he tweeted out Rashee Rice targets by game going back to week 12 of last year. This is inclusive of the playoffs, but since week 12 of last year, he's gotten 12, 10, 9, 10, 9, 12, 6, 12, 4, 9, 8, 4. Those are all of his targets per game. He is like crushing it on target since week 12 of last year. And they came out the gate doing the same exact thing. He went 7 for 9 for 103 in week 1, and it was all like quick stuff. Like he was just getting off the line super quick. It looked really fun. He scored 20 DraftKings points last week without even scoring a touchdown. I love the volume. He's cheap enough that it's easy then to fit someone like a CeeDee Lamb of my lineup if I want to. But I'm going to get cheap. I'm going to pick some cheaper guys elsewhere, but I love the volume that I'm getting off of Rashee Rice.
Stepping away from DFS for a second into football analysis, when Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce played together, there was Tyreek Hill stretching the field, Travis Kelce taking those short and intermediate routes, and it just worked. It seems like Xavier Worthy is going to stretch the field and Rashee Rice is going to take these short and intermediate routes. And I understand it's 1 week and we don't panic after 1 week. But if this is a trend that holds true, it is not great for the outlook of my tight end one, Travis Kelce.
Yeah, that's why you should play Travis Kelce in tournament lineups this week, because people might be afraid of the same thing. I think there is something there. I do also think they're using Travis Kelce as a decoy a little bit, helping him clear out lineups, clear out the defense in interesting ways, not necessarily over the top, but in different, unique ways. But just keep the faith. Keep the faith, my friend. It's not. It's too soon.
It would be so hard for me to not have the faith. I'm just throwing it out there. My last question to you is, Rashee Rice is clearly the wide receiver one, but Xavier Worthy has the hype right now. Is Xavier Worthy obviously I'm going to say he's a tournament play, but is Xavier Worthy a guy where his game, is that someone you could see working their way into a safer cash play, or is the nature of his game one where you just are going to tend to avoid them in cash play rosters?
Yeah, it just depends on how his volume plays out over time. Last week, he did really well from a fantasy perspective because he scored 2 touchdowns. That is not something I can predict week over week. What I can predict is Rashee Rice getting 10 targets, and I'm going to go with that in cash lineups. There also, honestly, it could be a good time to play Rashee Rice in a tournament because people are like, oh, Xavier Worthy is the tournament play. Rashee Rice is going to get the volume, though, and Xavier Worthy, if he's getting 5 manufactured touches a week and 1 week, 2 of them goes for a touchdown, and the next week they don't, that kind of volatility could be good to take advantage of with someone more consistent like Rashee Rice.
And like you said, Rice hit 20 points last week without a touchdown. If this guy scores 2 touchdowns, all of a sudden he's the slate breaker and someone else wins that Milli maker. Bookworms. These are the $4,000 to $6,000 players. We say these are the folks that are have their noses in the books, but are easily underestimated. Watch out. They're sharp. Austin, it took 1 week for you to get a guy who you were just a year early on into the show sheet.
Yeah, I wasn't a year early. I wrote about him this summer, my friend.
Was it this? Oh my God. I remember you and I were having a fight about it. I did not realize it was just this summer. Clearly a lifetime has passed since the summer.
Yeah, it's been a long summer. No, but Wan'Dale Robinson, I wrote about him for our A Look Inside series. He is $4,300 on DraftKings, $5,400 on FanDuel. His targets were great. His catch rate was not. He caught 6 catches on 12 targets, but unfortunately, that was still perfectly fine for his price last week. He got 10 fantasy points. He was in this 4K range last week. The Washington football team, has been the second best matchup for wide receivers since week 16 of last season. A defense is one that I think we're going to be able to pick on a lot throughout this season. So I'm really, really loving Wan'Dale Robinson this week. I also am just going to throw a shout out to Demarcus Robinson while I'm here as well. Again, Bukanuku is out. Demarcus Robinson, it could very much be cash viable, but I haven't talked about a running back up until this point of the show. So I needed to throw a running back in here, and I needed to highlight Jordan Mason, because if Christian McCaffrey is out of the lineup this week, Jordan Mason will be, I would not be surprised if he was 70% rostered in cash lineups if Christian McCaffrey is out. Pay attention to the injury report for this one. Obviously, if Christian McCaffrey plays, I then get a little bit lower on Jordan Mason, but it wouldn't surprise me if they do just sit Christian McCaffrey 1 more week. They're trying to win a Super Bowl. They're not trying to win week 2. Jordan Mason had nearly 150 rushing yards, and he scored a touchdown last week. He had a ton of volume too as well. So I'm with the price tag at $5,200 on DraftKings. He doesn't have to do much to pay off.
we're going to talk about our favorite tournament plays at the end of the show, but Mason is a guy who terrifies me in tournaments, assuming, again, Christian McCaffrey is out, because that price point just means he's stapled into everybody's lineup, correct?
Yes, which it can cut both ways, right? Because if he's stapled in everyone's lineup, it's like you're not getting different, but also you don't need to get
is he the one where you don't need to get different?
Yeah, it becomes a free square. It's just you plug him in, and now it could be an opportunity to gain leverage for sure. You may consider the running back on the other side of the field in that game as a way to gain leverage on Jordan Mason in that situation. But it's not necessarily the wrong move to play Jordan Mason in a tournament if Christian McCaffrey is out.
And going back to your Wan'Dale Robinson, there was one other thing I wanted to throw out. I don't buy heavily into PFF grades. I don't remember the exact grade, but Washington's rookie corner, who is their slot corner, his name's like Mike Santrasil, was like the lowest graded corner on PFF last week. So Wan'Dale Robinson should have another easy matchup unless this rookie finds his footing right away. So I'm not going to give you a hard time on either one of these guys, because I probably would have in Wan'Dale Robinson, but I'm going to call this the Alec Pierce lesson. So I'm not going to give you any issues with that. My favorite segment of the show for two reasons. I love punt plays. I typically have to fit one or two of them into my lineup. And it's called C's Get Degrees, which, again, if you knew me while I was in school, it's just the absolute perfect name for a segment for me to be a part of. And Austin, this is where you fit in our defense. And if I'm going to give you a hard time this week, it's probably right here, but go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the C's Get Degrees category is actually kind of tough right now. There's not a bunch of cheap players at the positional areas. What is the word I'm looking for? At the other positions that I feel confident in right now. So I am looking at defenses that are cheap right now. I am going with the New York Giants. They are $2,700 on DraftKings. It's very cheap. They are $3,500 on FanDuel. I'm once again betting against the Washington Commanders. They have kind of a middling implied team total this week. They're in the bottom half of implied team totals, so not expected to score a ton of points. Jaden Daniels did indeed take 2 sacks last week, which is important for the floor for a cash defense. It's just,
I think he actually fumbled, like, if I remember correctly, 3 times, but didn't lose any of them either, which is massive.
Yes,
so.
Very good touchdown luck on that side. I'm betting against a rookie quarterback. He had a good first week, but rookie quarterbacks are prone to throw interceptions, to fumble the ball. He takes sacks, and this front is good. That's
what I was going to say. This is the thing that saves you, is a nasty front seven from New York, and Jaden Daniels seemingly unwilling to push the football down the field right now.
Yes, 100%. So I'm a fan of it just because it's cheap. Now, if I have some extra salary, I might try and pay up, but this allows me to make sure that I'm maximizing the rest of my lineup.
Now, I think it makes sense. I couldn't get in on the Giants or Washington when I was doing my rankings for the week. The Giants and Washington, I am far below ECR on both of them. Joe Zolo on our show last night was all about Washington, asking if they fit into my stream of the week. Washington scored negative fantasy points last week. I'm not just going to jump on board because it's Daniel Jones on the other side. There's problems on both sides of the ball for both teams. I'll probably stay away from this unless I'm looking at like Jaden Daniels, Brian Robinson. These are guys that I'm interested in, and Wan'Dale Robinson. But you did bring up an interesting point. This was a tough category. I had to fit a punt play into a lineup I was building today, and I was looking at my own rankings. I had nobody below $5,000, like not one single player. Now, when I say rankings for football guys, we only rank the top 12 at each position. So, but I couldn't, normally you can find a punt play, like a guy who fits in. And this week, there was nobody I was super interested in.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. The pricing has been very interesting this year. I'm curious if they have intentionally changed that in the offseason and how it might materialize over the season.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Guys, before we move on to the tournament plays of the week, I just want to give you one more reminder. If you check the links in the description of this video, we have little mini tournaments going on both FanDuel and DraftKings. $2 to enter. Top 3 positions get paid, and we will announce the winners on this show. If you want to hear your name live on air, not live, but it'll be live when we say it. But not when you hear it. If you want to hear your name, go ahead and make sure you enter those contests. We like to fill them up. We're getting pretty close. Big group going on at Club Fantasy, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. As I mentioned before, Austin handles the cash play, and then for tourney play, we just kind of give some of our favorite plays, and I actually jump in here a little bit because I have interesting thoughts when it comes to some of these tourney plays. And then I like to hear if these thoughts are just wrong. And Austin will normally let me know. So Austin, I'm going to get us started with this one at quarterback, because you have a guy I like as well. I think there is some opportunity with Joe Burrow right now because of how bad he was in week 1. When you look at Joe Burrow's history and the Bengals history, they are terrible in week 1. And now you go to a rival where I looked this up for the show on Wednesday. Joe Burrow against the Chiefs averages in 4 games, I think 316 yards and 2.4 touchdowns. He did have a bad game against them in the playoffs the last time they faced off, but normally he cooks against the Chiefs. And right now he's at a fair price point, $7,400 on FanDuel, $6,300 on DraftKings. And I think this is a game that should, in theory, there's not going to be any weather. I think this should be a shootout, Austin.
Yeah, I love your process on this one. I am afraid of your content. The process here, though, is really good. Like, bet on players who had a down week 1, people in tournaments in particular, right? Because people are going to be afraid of playing Joe Burrow. So that means it's an easy way to get different. And we do know he has the ceiling. I'm afraid of this particular application of that process because I saw a video of Joe Burrow doing this all game long, and that stressed me out. So I won't be playing Joe Burrow.
And then apparently put a glove on and took it off. Like, my man is not right in the hand right now.
No, he is not. So I won't be playing him, but I respect the process.
I appreciate it. And your process led you to a guy who is my stream of the week this week. So I was happy to see him on your list. So.
Yes, there's a very, Brian and I have talked about before, there's a very similar process for how we go about stream of the week and DFS plays. I'm a fan of Jared Goff this week. So he is $6,400 on DraftKings, $7,800 on FanDuel. The reason I am interested in him is I am wondering if people are going to look at how the Detroit Lions got the job done last week and extract too much from that and think, oh, they ran the ball, they ran it tough, they just continued to pound the rock on this one. They play Tampa Bay this week. Tampa Bay's a pass funnel defense. They're actually pretty good at defending the run. I don't think David Montgomery is going to be able to get going as well as he did last week. I have a lot of interest in the pass catchers on the Detroit side because I'm also I'm taking a similar process that we just talked about with Ryan. Yeah. I'm betting on players that had down week 1s that have really incredible ceiling. And so I'm planning on stacking Jared Goff. And I think that this is a really easy way. It's also a dome game, which is always good for Jared Goff. And I like the Tampa Bay offense on the other side.
One of my favorite things about early DFS is that as soon as week 1 is over, they switch the opponent rank over to 1 week of data. And right now, people are going to see that Tampa Bay was so good against the pass last week. And we've already talked about this, Austin. Yes. They played Jaden Daniels. This is not the same as playing Jared Goff.
Yes. And to your point, when I figure out what players I want to do at this point in the season, I am pulling some data from last season for that very reason, not because last season means anything about this year necessarily. Like there's some information that can be useful there. It's a way that I add to my process, but right now I'm relying also on just what I see, the eye test. I'm trying to not overly rely on week 1 data and pull in some of that data from end of the year. And Tampa Bay was not good against the pass last year. And also Antoine Winfield might not play this game. Another reason why this could be a good matchup against that secondary.
Now we're in the same train of thought there. And I'm fading Monty harder than I'm fading Jahmyr Gibbs just because of the pass catching ability of Jahmyr Gibbs. Speaking of running backs, let's move on. So Austin, who is your favorite tournament play at running back?
Yeah, my favorite tournament play, speaking of Washington again, is Devin Singletary. I am once again betting against the Washington Commanders defense. They did not defend the run particularly well last week. They haven't been good against the run in recent history either. Devin Singletary is just really cheap. He got 10 touches last week. So this is the thing that I think could scare people away, which is why I also like him for a tournament, is that he only had like 10 or 11 touches last week, but they were down in that game really early. They lost 28-6. I think they might be able to keep up a little bit more. It's a divisional matchup, so people tend to show up more for those games. And Again, Jaden Daniels, if he turns the ball over, can help keep the game script flowing for Devin Singletary. So I like this as a cheap play at running back who he is going to still be the lead back, and he can get the touchdowns that can help him pay off at his salary.
This was the first guy that had me worried, Austin, on is this a guy worth eating the chalk? And I guess my question to you is, do you think he is going to be overexposed? And that's J.K. Dobbins taking on the putrid Carolina Panthers. And so we saw a Panthers team last week just get beat up all over the field by the Saints. We saw Alvin Kamara find the end zone. We saw Jamal Williams find the end zone, something he was barely able to do in all of 2023. And not only that, we saw a rejuvenated J.K. Dobbins, who looks like he is in full control of that Los Angeles Chargers backfield. He is only 6,800 on FanDuel, 5,400 on DraftKings. I love him as a tournament play, and I'm probably going to try to sneak him into a few of my cash lineups as well. But my question to you is, just going into the tournament, do you think he is chalk, and is he one worth eating the chalk based on the opponent?
So last week, you may recall, I gave 2 running backs for this section because I was trying to give enough players for you to start a full tournament lineup using my picks. Yeah. I did not do that this week because you picked my running back, which was J.K. Dobbins. I actually thought about this a lot. I went back and forth on that same exact question. I thought for a second, do I want to play Gus Edwards instead? Because people are going to jump on the J.K. Dobbins bandwagon, and maybe Gus Edwards has a big week instead. What I decided was that it is okay to ride with J.K. Dobbins again this week, even if it is chalky. I think he could be really impactful in tournaments because of the way that the Saints had success running the ball last week. Last week, the better running back was Alvin Kamara, who got outside a lot. He was running more outside of the tackles, outside of the numbers. That is the same style of running that the Chargers are going to use J.K. Dobbins in. Whereas Jamal Williams, he got a decent amount of volume. He got a touchdown, but he didn't get a ton of yards. And Jamal Williams, to me, is analogous to Gus Edwards. So I decided J.K. Dobbins is the running back I want. I love this pick. I will be playing him in tournaments this week.
Perfect. I love to hear that. And I also love to hear your process, because it didn't connect for me that at the very least, if you look at me and Austin's picks together, listen to me and Austin's picks together, you'll be able to build a full tournament lineup if you agree with everything we're saying. So we're going to move on to the wide receivers. Austin has 3 for you. I have 1. And Austin, this is that stack that you have been waiting to tell us about. You believe that the sun god is ready to shine again.
Yeah, I'm just betting on a bounce back for Amon-Ra St.Brown. I said I wasn't going to play him in cash, and I stand by that. I wouldn't do it just because I want to see it. I want to see it be consistent. But in this matchup, he should be able to feast against a struggling Tampa Bay secondary. He's $8,100 on DraftKings. He's $9K on FanDuel. He can easily pay this off. He can go off for 30 points. So I am a big fan of him. I also love the game environment. One thing I didn't talk about with the game environment here, it is the highest over-under of the week. So it is possible that a lot of people land on this. I'm hoping that they don't, because they think that there's going to be a lot of rushing happening in this game, or they're going to think, oh, Baker Mayfield's not going to do that again.
I was going to say, I feel like a bad week from Jared Goff and the natural distrust of Baker Mayfield could steer people away from this game.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think the fact that Amon-Ra coming off of a 4-point week could be beneficial for his roster percentage. So I'm going for it. I'm also going for a correlation in a different matchup. This is the Los Angeles Rams versus the Arizona Cardinals, which is a preview of a Week 17 matchup for all of those best ball players who stacked a bunch of Cardinals and Rams like myself. I'm going with a couple of cheap guys here. So I like picking Michael Wilson this week because I really thought he was going to be the number 2 receiver coming into the season. And Greg Dortch took that role last week. So I'm sticking with it. I'm sticking with it.
But Wilson scored the first touchdown, if I remember correctly. So
I do not recall. Maybe yes, probably. Yeah. I would just take your word on that one. But I'm betting on him getting the volume this week and having more targets than Greg Dortch. And so I'm kind of keeping the faith of that. I'm not going to let Greg Dortch distract me. I could see people like pivoting to him and be like, oh, Greg Dortch, he's the number 2 now. I'm sticking with Michael Wilson. On the flip side, I already referenced Demarcus Robinson once. I do like him in cash. I also like him in tournaments this week. He is 4K on DraftKings. He had 7 targets last week. I saw in my lineup, in my redraft lineups, a bunch of people throwing a bunch of fab at one of the other Los Angeles friends, Tyler Johnson. And I'm like, okay, apparently people think it's this guy instead of Demarcus Robinson. I think that could translate to roster percentages. So I'm going to stick with Demarcus Robinson.
Austin, I know a large portion of our viewing audience comes off of Twitter, and I find it interesting. Twitter favorites right now, Greg Dortch, Tyler Johnson. And I love that you're essentially creating a contrarian play, which is something you're kind of looking for in tournaments, because I imagine I didn't look at the prices because I'm not in on Dortch or Tyler Johnson either. The prices are probably very similar.
Yes.
And if you have all of the talking heads screaming the other two, and you are able to get into a, 100-person 50-50, and 50% of those people are listening to Twitter, and you're able to be the one who sneaks in the 2 contrarian plays who both probably have a better chance at the very least of scoring a touchdown. I love that we're presenting the alternative to the Twitter talking heads, of which we are kind of a part of that group.
Speak for yourself. I barely tweet.
Nor I joke that I'm a serial retweeter now. If you want great fantasy
Yes.
information from other people, you want to follow me because I find it and I put it out there for everybody. But here's some great fantasy information. Chris Godwin is good at football. Austin already mentioned this game has the highest over under, and I think everyone's going to jump on Mike Evans because he scored 2 touchdowns. I hate to break it to you because I love Mike Evans. He is not going to score 2 touchdowns every week. That is not how football works. Chris Godwin, I'm almost positive, led the team in targets. I think he caught, should know these numbers off the top of my head, but I think he caught 8 out of 10 targets, something along those lines. Yeah. Hyper targeted, reeled in the balls, found the end zone. And in this matchup where Detroit is not a great team in coverage, as long as Baker Mayfield has time, and he actually looked pretty good as an improviser last week, as long as he has time, these wide receivers are going to get open. But the great thing is Chris Godwin back in the slot. Baker Mayfield doesn't need a lot of time to find him. And right now, K. Dotton hasn't really stepped up. So Godwin is going to kind of control the middle of that field. And I just think that means really great things for his volume. But I think, Austin, people are going to mistake him as a volume play and not see the upside. Chris Godwin can easily find the end zone twice in this same offense.
Yes, exactly. Another reason I didn't put 4 receivers this week is because you took my 4th receiver.
We're very
much
buddy.
in on Chris Godwin this week in tournaments for all of the same reasons you said. Another thing about this is I think the narrative around Detroit Lions cornerbacks is going to start shifting soon. Those cornerbacks did play really well last week on the outside. I think not that they're going to like completely shut down Mike Evans. Like we're not getting OG Marcus Lattimore happening here, but I do think that means that the Buccaneers are going to look more to the slot receivers, which is going to be Chris Godwin. It's the role that Cooper Kupp played last week. And so I am very much in on Chris Godwin as my bring back in this lineup. I think it's a really, really solid play.
I love it because I get made fun of routinely because I fall for coach speak, hook, line, and sinker. And what brought me in on Chris Godwin was they said he was going to play the Cooper Kupp role. And now he gets to go play the 21 target Cooper Kupp role against Detroit. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I kind of am. And then, Austin, as we move on to tight ends, we're going to keep picking on this game. And this is probably the first time where there's kind of a fundamental difference in your tournament lineup versus my tournament lineup, because you are willing to pay up at tight end.
Yes. And I think one of the things that I started to allude to earlier, and I'll be more explicit about here, is that sometimes paying for the most expensive player is the contrarian move because people are afraid of the salary. So I am looking at Sam LaPorta at tight end this week. He's $6,300 on DraftKings, $7,900 on FanDuel. It's a similar rationale as why I'm looking at Amon-Ra St.Brown. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a pass funnel defense, and I think that could benefit LaPorta this week. He got in the end zone last week, even though he didn't get a ton of volume. But I could see if with the running game is not working as effectively as it did last week for Detroit, that it could end up favoring both of the number 1 pass catchers. Jameson Williams got a little bit banged up in the game last week. I think they're going to continue manufacturing touches with him, but his health is something that we'll be monitoring on and off probably throughout the game and throughout the season because he is kind of a smaller body receiver. It's just the nature of playing football. So that could end up benefiting a guy like Sam LaPorta, who I think could go overlooked this week to some extent because people don't want to pay up or are biased by last week's matchup.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because all of the good tight ends failed last week. Just putting it bluntly, all of the high price tight ends failed last week. And it's the Amon-Ra St.Brown effect. We're not going to pay. You're not going to fool me twice. Everyone's afraid of getting fooled twice, but that's not how week 1 works. And that's not how the NFL works. So don't get destroyed by your priors. Now, speaking of getting destroyed by your priors, talk about confirmation bias. I was tooting the horn of Brock Bowers all preseason. And then he comes out and finishes as the tight end 3, 8 targets, catches 6 of them, 58 yards. Not the greatest game, didn't find the end zone. But guess what? There's going to be a lot of games where Las Vegas Raiders don't find the end zone. It's just the nature of this. But I like the volume I saw from Brock Bowers early on. And this is another tough matchup. They're taking on the Baltimore Ravens after playing the Chargers last week. The Ravens have a tough defense, but while Travis Kelce did not have a good game, that does not mean that Chiefs tight ends did not have a good game. The position was targeted 7 times, caught 6 of those balls for 71 yards. Again, did not find the end zone. Obviously, Bowers has a little competition in Michael Mayer, but there was no real target competition in Mayer last week. I think Bowers could come in here again and be the slot wide receiver for the Raiders, a team that's going to need to throw the ball a lot, Austin. Not a guy I would necessarily play in cash, because do you really want to play any Raider not named Devontae Adams in cash? And I don't even know how even trustworthy he is at this point. But for tournaments, I think there's an upside to Bowers that right now at his price point, I'm kind of buying into.
Yeah, I think in a tournament setting, I could see this game going overlooked. I wouldn't necessarily stack it heavily, but I might do like a skinny stack, like do a little Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, bring it back with Brock Bowers. Keep it simple, or just even do Lamar Jackson by himself and bring it back with Brock Bowers, because Lamar Jackson can get there without necessarily one of his pass catchers getting there.
For my my parlay bets this week, I was looking at the guys in the early window who I like to score a touchdown, and Lamar Jackson jumped off the screen at me. And that's such a good point, is Lamar Jackson's a guy in DFS lineups that you can play naked. Like, you don't need to have somebody there with him, because he could easily find the end zone twice himself. Obviously, the Raiders have a great front 4. I don't know that I would call it a whole front 7. Well, Lamar Jackson's the kind of guy that just makes those guys look silly sometimes. So I don't know that it's going to matter. I don't need to know that we need to be afraid of that Raiders front 4.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And then when we move on, we segueing into defense just perfectly. When you're finishing up that tournament lineup, you got to find someone else. Austin, I'm going to let you get us started before I talk about what might be the chalkiest play of the entire week. And I want to get your feelings on that. However, it's interesting to call the Patriots contrarian, but I think you're getting a little contrarian here.
Yeah, I think people are just down on the Patriots, and I'm like, this is a good defense, y'all. It's been a good defense.
Very down on the Patriots.
Like, I've never felt better about taking an over on a 4.5 game win team. And when they beat the Bengals, I was like, give me the money now, bet 365. Like, I just made it happen. No, but I'm in on this defense. They were good last week. They were able to put pressure on the Bengals. I also love their matchup, and they're cheap. They're at $2,800 on DraftKings. They're $3,400 on FanDuel. So it's really nice. It allows me to make sure that I'm able to pay up elsewhere. They get the Seahawks, who, interestingly, they did okay last week, but they have had some offensive line struggles on and off over the past year. There are still some offensive line concerns there. They've had some injuries on and off over the past year or so. So this Seattle is actually a pretty decent matchup for defenses. They also turned the ball over a couple of times last week. And they were the 2 safety team last week. So there are a lot of ways where the Patriots can pop off, because I don't really think Denver is that good of a defense. Maybe they will be, but I don't associate them as a good defense right now. But maybe by week 3, I'll change my tune. But I think the Patriots are way tougher than Denver, and so should be able to put the pressure on Geno Smith and potentially force some turnovers that way.
Plus Kenneth Walker dealing with that oblique injury. And if you take that part of this offense out, that really limits what the Patriots have to focus on. And when the Patriots can focus on shutting down certain players, it works out really, really well. So, Austin, I mentioned chalk before when it came to J.K. Dobbins in this Chargers game, but I don't know that there's any more chalk than taking the defense that is playing the Carolina Panthers. And I've struggled so far this season at finding the super cheap defenses. At least the Chargers aren't the most expensive, like my Dallas Cowboy pick last week. But the Cowboys worked out for me. They played well on defense and they got a punt return. A second thing to like about the Chargers, Darius Davis is a very good return man. But I don't think that's even going to come up in my analysis. They're playing the Panthers. That was just an offense that looked like they could get nothing done, Austin. And I'm going to take the Chargers, who have Khalil Mack, who have Joey Bosa, who both registered multiple sacks last week. Bosa's dealing with an injury, but hopefully he'll be out there for this one. And again, it's not so much betting on the Chargers, who played well last week against the Raiders. It's betting against the Panthers, who played just terribly against the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a totally fine bet. It is chalky. I don't love playing the chalk defense in tournament lineups, but honestly, you can get away with it. I think it seems unlikely that the Panthers are going to really pop off this week, but so it's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, and as we wrap up the show, it is time for the head-to-head matchup. And folks, it was a nail biter last week, and I'm not saying that facetiously at all. Me and Austin are going to announce a lineup. And I double checked the scoring on this, Austin. Me and Austin are going to announce the lineup. We are going to go head to head. This may be some version of the lineups we're playing against you, but they are exclusively for him versus I on this show. If we change our lineups later, it doesn't matter. It's what we said on this show. And last week I did end up changing my lineup on DraftKings, but the one I announced on this show scored 92.3, and I scored my own lineup first. And I said, oh man, I lost badly, especially after I checked Austin's quarterback and 2 running backs. But man, did your wide receivers let you down? And Austin scored 92.2, folks. I beat him by a 1/10 of a point. It's a week 1 miracle. Austin is 0-1. Austin, I will do you the favor of announcing my lineup first, and then we'll get yours in here. So you've heard me mention almost all of these guys on the show. Joe Burrow, J.K. Dobbins. I do like Brian Robinson this week taking on that Giants defense. We saw him essentially own the backfield last week for Washington. I like Najee Harris. I'm going with a 3 running back lineup, even though Austin blatantly gave the advice that you should not do that, especially at PPR formats. But I don't think Denver's going to be able to slow Najee. We saw a good game out of Kenneth Walker last week. I am going to go with Jamar Chase for my Joe Burrow stack. And then I mentioned Chris Godwin. Austin, the cheapest player I could find that I liked was Jameson Williams. So we spent a ton of time talking about that Detroit game. We didn't even talk about the guy who had the best game of his career last week. So I managed to fit him in. I'm going with my Brock Bowers and Los Angeles Chargers play.
Yeah, it's the first time that I've had a losing record in this segment.
Yeah, and by a 1/10 of a point.
Time to right the ship. I will say I did switch my lineup. I scored slightly more points in my
yeah, you did
lineup.
better on what you had on DraftKings. Yes.
Yeah, so that was good. But for this week, I am rolling with Anthony Richardson at quarterback at $6,800. I've only got 2 running backs. The lineup I will actually play may change depending on what we get on injury news. But as of now, I have James Conner at 6,400 and Jordan Mason at 5,200. And then I have my 4 receivers. I've got Rashee Rice at 6,700, Wan'Dale Robinson at 4,300, Demarcus Robinson at 4K, and Cooper Kupp at 7,600. I'm a little nervous about having 3 players from this Arizona Los Angeles Rams matchup. I was
going to say 2 receivers from the same team and 3 from the game so far.
So we'll see, but I like it. So we'll see if I stay that way for my actual lineup, but we'll keep it for this. And then I actually went for Sam LaPorta in my cash lineup, 6,300.
Okay.
And then the New York Giants defense at $2,700.
All right. So those will be the lineups that he and I are talking about on the show next week. But don't forget, you can also play against us on DraftKings, on FanDuel. They are $2 entries. They will typically fill up. We pay our first 3 members. And guess what? We got 2 winners from last week, 2 different people on DraftKings and FanDuel, and they're both winners from the year before. So P for Shizzle over on DraftKings takes down the tournament with 151.08. For reference, the Milli Maker scored 196. So for our small tournament, only 40 points off of the Milli Maker. That's not bad at all. And on FanDuel, it was Jay Malaga at 142.86. So again, you guys can play with us. Check the links in the description of this video. Austin, your article should drop on Saturday morning, correct?
Yes, that is right. I have my cash article that drops on Saturdays. I'll have a couple of more players than what we talked about on this show Also, if you're doing the showdown slates, we talk about Josh Hudson and I have a show that releases on Thursdays to talk about the Thursday night football showdown slates. That is exclusively tournament oriented because that's just the way my brain works for those. But we have plenty of DFS content coming your way.
Yeah, lots of DFS content. And Josh would love if I would list every single show that we do, but it's too many, plain and simple. So this show airs on Friday morning, which means the next time you will see us live is Saturday morning, start sit different day. So if you guys have any start sit questions, they spend an entire hour, no show sheet. All they're doing is answering your questions. So make sure you guys are looking out for that. We go live about 12 times per week now, just bringing you guys dynasty content, DFS content, redraft content, anything you're really looking for. We probably have it for you, and we are more than happy to help you out. Guys, that's going to be the end of the show. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Remember, when those players get hurt, DFS is there for you. We'll see you at next class.